São Paulo, Brazil. October 2002. Brooklyn Paulista neighborhood, one of the city's most upscale addresses. A quiet street, luxurious homes, silent neighborhood. The kind of place where nothing bad would ever happen. Or at least that's what everyone thought. In the early morning hours of October 31st, 2002, ironically Halloween, a crime of shocking brutality occurs inside one of these residences. Two bodies, Manfred Albert von Richthofen, 50 years old, respected civil engineer. Maricia von Richthofen, 52 years old, dedicated psychiatrist. Parents, successful professionals, respected members of São Paulo's high society, murdered inside their own home, in the place where they should have been safest. Police are called. The scene is devastating. And then begins an investigation that would reveal a truth even more shocking than the crime itself. The perpetrators weren't strangers. They weren't common burglars. They were closer than anyone could imagine. This is the von Richthofen case. A story about family, obsession, manipulation, and betrayal that would forever mark Brazilian criminology. To understand how we arrived at that terrible night, we first need to know the von Richthofen family. From the outside, they were the definition of success. The family many envied and admired. Manfred Albert von Richthofen, descendant of a traditional German family, graduate civil engineer, respected professional in the market, serious man, dedicated to work, tireless provider. Built a solid career and considerable fortune through decades of hard work. He was known for being rigorous but fair. He valued education, discipline, and moral principles. He had a clear vision of how he wanted his family to develop. Maricia von Richthofen, established psychiatrist, cultured woman, sensitive, dedicated to both her profession and family. Ironically, someone whose life was dedicated to understanding the human mind, helping people in crisis, preventing tragedies. She was described as affectionate but also protective. She wanted the best for her children and was always attentive to their emotional development. The children. The couple had two children. The eldest, Andreas, already an adult, engineering student following in his father's footsteps, and the youngest, Suzane Louise von Richthofen, 19 years old, studying law at the prestigious Pontifical Catholic University of São Paulo, PUC-SP. Suzane was described by many as intelligent, well-mannered, beautiful. She came from an elite private school. She had everything money could buy. International trips, designer clothes, imported car, access to opportunities that millions of Brazilians could only dream of. The family lived in a spacious, comfortable house in Brooklyn. They had financial stability, social reputation, apparently everything a family could desire. But appearances deceive, because behind the facade of perfection, tensions were beginning to grow, invisible cracks in the family foundation that would soon transform into insurmountable abysses. 2001, Suzane von Richthofen, then 18 years old, meets Daniel Cravinhos de Paula e Silva. Daniel was 21 years old. He came from a working-class, middle-class family, very different from the luxury environment Suzane grew up in. He worked as a hydraulic plumber and construction helper. For Suzane, raised in a golden cradle and accustomed to the elite academic and professional environment, this young man represented something different, something new, perhaps even exciting for the very difference. The romance was quick and intense. That overwhelming passion characteristic of first loves, constant messages, frequent meetings, passionate declarations. And then, Suzane introduces Daniel to her parents. The rejection is immediate. Manfred and Mauricia do not approve of the relationship. The reasons are multiple. Social class difference. Daniel didn't come from the same background. He didn't have the same formal education. He didn't share the same values and ambitions that the von Richthofens valued. Difference in perspectives. The parents had plans for Suzane. Finish her law degree, pursue graduate studies, build a solid career, eventually marry someone of the same social and professional level. Genuine concern, or so they thought. As a psychiatrist, Mauricia observed signs that worried her. The intensity of the relationship, how quickly Suzane seemed to disconnect from the family, the influence Daniel apparently exerted over her. And then they do what many well-intentioned but misguided parents would do. They try to forcibly separate the couple. They forbid Suzane from seeing Daniel. They control her outings. They monitor her phone. They establish rigid rules. They threaten to cut off financial support. The intention was to protect, but the effect was the opposite. Because when you prohibit a teenage relationship based on intense passion, you don't destroy it, you strengthen it, you romanticize it, you transform the lovers into Romeo and Juliet, fighting against the world. And that's exactly what happened. What started as a common romance quickly transformed into something much darker. On Suzane's side, her parents' prohibition didn't distance her from Daniel. On the contrary, she began to lie, to create elaborate excuses, to meet him secretly. But something deeper was happening in her psyche. Criminal psychology experts who later studied the case identified several factors. 1. Romeo and Juliet syndrome. The prohibition intensified the feeling. The relationship became not just about love, but about rebellion, freedom, self-determination. 2. Emotional dichotomy. Suzane found herself divided between two impossible loyalties, her family and her boyfriend. This division created intense psychological conflict. 3. Gradual dehumanization of parents. When we're repeatedly told that someone is an obstacle to our happiness, we begin to see them not as people, but as problems to be solved. Psychologists call this cognitive dehumanization. 4. Reinforcement by Daniel. Daniel, consciously or unconsciously, fed this view. Your parents don't understand you. Only I understand you. They want to control you. We deserve to be happy. On Daniel's side, Daniel was also going through his own transformation. Feeling rejected, humiliated by Suzane's family, he developed resentment. It wasn't just about love, it was about dignity, about proving his worth, about winning against those who despised him. And there was another factor. Cristian Cravinhos de Paula e Silva, Daniel's younger brother. Christian, then 26 years old, had a history of behavioral problems. He was more aggressive, more impulsive. And when Daniel shared his frustrations with his brother, he found not just emotional support but a frightening willingness to take action. The idea begins to form. There's no exact date when the idea of murder first arose, but conversations reconstructed later reveal it was gradual. It started as angry fantasy. It would be better if they disappeared. Then it evolved into speculation. If something happened to them, I would inherit everything and we'd be free. And then horribly it transformed into a plan. The crime wasn't an impulse. It wasn't a moment of temporary madness. It was cold, calculated planning, executed over weeks. The formation of the trio, Suzane, Daniel, and Christian. 3 people who, together, fed each other until the unthinkable became not only thinkable, but executable. The elements of the plan. 1. Timing. They chose a night when Suzane's brother, Andreas, would be away. Fewer witnesses, fewer complications. 2. Acts as Suzane would provide entry to the house. She herself would open the door for the executioners. 3. Simulation. After the crime, they would simulate a burglary. They would mess up the house, make it look like a random invasion. 4. Alibi. Suzane would claim to be sleeping. She wouldn't have seen or heard anything. 5. Murder weapon. They decided to use brute force. Iron bars, blows to the head. Quick death, they hoped. The secret meetings. In the weeks leading up to the crime, the trio met secretly. Suzane provided information about her parents' routine, times they slept, house layout, location of bedrooms. Daniel and Christian discussed attack strategy, how to enter, how to act, how to ensure there would be no resistance. And Suzane? Suzane actively participated. She wasn't a passive victim being manipulated. She was an integral part of the plan. She provided information. She gave suggestions. She reinforced the decision when any of the others hesitated. Psychologists who analyzed the case later were shocked by Suzane's level of involvement. There were no signs of coercion. There were no threats against her. She was there by her own choice. The point of no return. There's a moment in every criminal planning when you cross a line, when it stops being fantasy and becomes real commitment. For the trio, that moment came when they bought the iron bars that would be used in the crime. There was no turning back. Or at least they believed so. Early morning of October 31st, 2002. While the rest of Brazil slept peacefully inside a house in Brooklyn, one of the most shocking crimes in Brazilian history was about to happen. 11:30 p.m. Last moments of normalcy. Manfred and Mauricia von Richthofen prepare for bed. Another workday finished. Andreas is away visiting friends. Suzane is home, supposedly in her room. It's a night like any other, or should be. 12:30 a.m. The execution. Daniel and Christian approach the house. Suzane, as planned, unlocks the door, lets them in silently. The three go upstairs, each step a greater betrayal, each second a chance to turn back that isn't taken. The attack on the father. Manfred sleeps in his room, doesn't hear the approaching footsteps, doesn't have a chance to defend himself. The blows are brutal. Multiple strikes with an iron bar. Extreme force. The goal is to ensure he doesn't wake up, doesn't scream, doesn't resist. Manfred Albert von Richthofen dies in his own bed, in the place where he should be safest, murdered while sleeping. The attack on the mother. Mauricia hears something. Perhaps the muffled sounds coming from the next room. Perhaps a maternal instinct alerting her that something is terribly wrong. She gets up, goes to investigate, and encounters her murderers. One of them, her own daughter. Imagine the terror of that moment, the confusion, the shock of seeing Suzane there, of understanding in seconds what is happening. Mauricia tries to flee, tries to scream, but she's caught. The blows are as brutal as those that killed her husband. Mauricia von Richthofen dies in the hallway of her home. Her last visions being her daughter's face. 1 a.m. After the massacre, 2 bodies, blood everywhere, and 3 people who have just crossed a line from which they can never return. And then they begin the simulation. With the parents dead, the trio initiates the second phase of the plan. Make it look like a burglary. The actions: open drawers and leave them open. Scatter objects on the floor. Break some items. Try to create the appearance of searching for valuables. But they make crucial mistakes, mistakes that any experienced investigator would immediately identify. Mistake 1. Almost nothing was stolen. If it were really a burglary, thieves would have taken electronics, jewelry, money. But the house remained practically intact in terms of material goods. Mistake 2. Disproportionate violence. Common burglars want to enter, grab valuables, leave quickly. The brutality of the murders indicated something personal. Rage, hatred. It wasn't the work of professional thieves. Mistake 3. Victim selectivity. Suzane, who supposedly was home, wasn't touched. This would immediately raise suspicions. Mistake 4. Lack of forced entry. There were no signs of forced invasion. How did the burglars get in? But in that moment, in the post-crime adrenaline, the trio doesn't notice these flaws. They believe their plan worked perfectly. Daniel and Christian leave the house. Suzane stays, waits. And then, 4 a.m., the discovery Suzane calls the police. Hysterical, or pretending hysteria, reports that she woke up and found her parents dead, that the house was invaded. Police arrive. The scene is shocking even for experienced investigators. And then begins the investigation that would unmask everything. From the very first moment, investigators from the São Paulo Civil Police felt something was wrong. The first 24 hours, inconsistencies in Suzane's statement. She claimed to have slept through everything, but her mother's screams should have woken her. Her room was untouched, while the rest of the house was messy. She didn't show the genuine shock expected from someone who just found their parents murdered. The crime scene didn't make sense. Forensic experts immediately identified that the mess was artificial. Visible valuables weren't taken. There were no signs of forced entry. The pattern of violence, the brutality indicated a crime of passion, not burglary. Multiple blows to the head suggested personal rage. The Medical Legal Institute concluded this was personal. Week 1. Digging deeper. Phone investigation. Records showed hundreds of calls between Suzane and Daniel in the days before the crime. Curious for someone who supposedly wasn't dating anymore. Witnesses. Neighbors and friends began to talk about the troubled relationship, about the family fights, about the prohibition, financial movements. Investigators discovered that Suzane had consulted lawyers about inheritance weeks before the crime. Week 2. Pressure increases. Police call Suzane for new statements. Call Daniel. Call Christian. The stories don't match. Contradictions emerge. Nervousness is visible. And then police apply a classic strategy. Isolate the suspects and make them believe the others have already confessed. The confession. Under increasing pressure, first Christian begins to talk, then Daniel, and finally, Suzane. Each one tries to minimize their own role. Suzane blames the brothers blame Suzane. But all admit it was planned, it was executed, it was murder. Brazil wakes up to headlines that would shock the country. Daughter planned death of her own parents. The von Richthofen case wasn't just news. It was a national phenomenon. Why did this case impact so much? 1. Breaking the family taboo. Children killing parents is one of the most fundamental violations of the social and family contract. It's practically an archetype of human horror. 2. Social class. It wasn't crime in a favela, it was crime in the elite. This deconstructed narratives that these things only happen in unstructured and poor families. 3. The coldness, the premeditation, the planning, Suzane's active participation. All of this shocked by its coldness. 4. The youth of those involved. Suzane was only 19 years old. She was a university student. She had her whole life ahead, and she chose this: media coverage. News programs dedicated hours to the case, weekly magazines with Suzane's face on the cover, debates on TV programs about psychology, education, family values. The trial would be broadcast live years later. Social impact. The case generated deep discussions. How should parents deal with relationships they disapprove of? Signs that a young person may be in crisis. Boundaries between protection and control. Influence of toxic relationships. July 2006. 4 years after the crime, Suzane von Richthofen's trial becomes one of the most watched in Brazilian history. The jury trial, Santana Forum, São Paulo. Packed. Lines to get in. Press from across the country. TV cameras broadcasting live. The prosecution. Prosecutors paint a devastating picture. Present evidence of the planning show messages exchanged between the trio display photos of the crime scene, causing shock reactions in the room. Call experts who explain the brutality of the murders. The prosecution argues it was cold, calculated for frivolous motives, inheritance and freedom to date. The defense, Suzane's lawyers, try several lines. She was manipulated by Daniel and Christian. She was in a fragile emotional state. She suffered psychological pressure from her parents. She didn't have real intention to kill, argument that experts easily destroy. Witnesses, devastated family members, friends in tears, technical experts, psychologists, and Suzane, who cried, who asked for forgiveness, who claimed remorse. The verdict. After days of trial, the jury gathers. Suzane Louise von Richthofen, guilty sentence, 39 years and 6 months in prison for double-qualified homicide, frivolous motive and use of resource that hindered victim's defense. Daniel Cravinhos, guilty sentence, 38 years and 6 months in prison. Christian Cravinhos, guilty sentence, 38 years and 6 months in prison. The room explodes in mixed reactions. Some applaud, others cry. Suzane's family disintegrates in tears. Was justice served? For some, yes. For others, no sentence could repair what was lost. In the following years, the von Richthofen case became the subject of intense study in criminal psychology, forensic psychiatry, and criminology. Suzane's psychological profile, experts identified several factors: narcissistic traits, exaggerated sense of self-importance, belief that her needs justified any action, inability to handle frustration, grew up in an environment where she usually got what she wanted. The prohibition of the relationship was unbearable frustration. Emotional disconnection. Studies showed that Suzane managed to mentally dehumanize her parents, seeing them as obstacles, not people. Group influence. The trio created an echo chamber where extreme ideas were normalized and mutually reinforced. Questions that remain. Did Suzane already have a predisposition to violence, or was it the context that created it? Did Daniel really manipulate her, or was she an equally active partner? Could the parents have done something different? There are no easy answers. Suzane von Richthofen served part of her sentence in closed regime. In 2015, she obtained progression to semi-open regime. In 2016, she was released on parole after serving about 1/6 of the sentence, Brazilian legal benefit. Today, she lives discreetly. She married a lawyer who visited her in prison. She tries to rebuild her life away from the spotlight. She rarely gives interviews. Daniel Cravinhos also progressed through the regime. Released on parole. completely distanced himself from Suzane, tries to live anonymously. Christian Cravinhos followed a similar path. Parole, discreet life. Andreas von Richthofen, Suzane's brother, received his parents' inheritance, completely broke ties with Suzane, lives reservedly, rarely speaks about the case. The house was sold. Other residents live there now, but the address remains marked in Brazilian criminal history. More than 20 years later, the von Richthofen case remains relevant. In cinema and TV, books were written, documentaries produced, films, The Girl Who Killed Her Parents and The Boy Who Killed My Parents, 2021, showing different perspectives of the same crime. In education, studied in law, psychology, journalism schools. Example in criminology courses used in discussions about family psychology. In society, changed conversations about how parents deal with their children's relationships. Alerted about signs of extreme behavior in youth. Generated debates about the prison system and sentence progression. The von Richthofen case is more than a crime. It's an uncomfortable mirror that Brazilian society was forced to look at. It's about a family that seemed perfect, but hid deep fissures. It's about young people who made decisions that destroyed multiple lives, including their own. It's about how love can distort into obsession, how protection can become control, how family conflicts, if unresolved, can escalate in unimaginable ways. The questions that remain: was Suzane von Richthofen a monster all along? Or was she created by circumstances? Could the parents have acted differently? Or would any action have led to the same end? Were Daniel and Christian manipulators? Or were they as manipulated as they were manipulators? There are no simple answers. What there are painful lessons about family communication, about dealing with conflicts, about recognizing signs of crisis, about the irreversible consequences of our choices. Manfred and Maricia von Richthofen were murdered by their own daughter, inside their home, in the place where they should have been safest. It's a horror that defies comprehension, but it's a horror that cannot be forgotten, because only by remembering, only by studying, only by reflecting on these extreme cases can we try, just try, to prevent them from happening again. Did this case impact you? Do you have opinions, doubts, reflections about what happened? Leave your like if you believe cases like this need to be discussed, not forgotten. Comment. What do you think about this case? Do you remember when it happened? What's your opinion on the factors that led to this tragedy? Let's have a respectful and deep conversation here in the comments. Subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss our next investigative videos. Every week we bring deep analyses of real cases that marked Brazil and the world. Share this video. Cases like this generate important discussions about family, psychology, justice, and society. See you in the next video, and remember, the best way to prevent tragedies is to understand them deeply.